Welcome to Strategic Total Compensation. It is my absolute pleasure to be here with all of you today, and what we discussed this morning, performance, it's a great tie-in because we do sometimes tie in compensation to performance. So I think you guys will have a great series of takeaways today. So did you know that 30% of Canadians list compensation and employee benefits is one of the top things when they're seeking jobs? 30%. They look for money, they look for benefits. And did you know that 85% actually are actively looking for a job, or they're open to talking to a recruiter? So that doesn't mean they're out there pounding the pavement, dropping their resumes off. But what that does mean, they are checking the newspapers. They're checking Monster. They're checking all the electronic job postings to see what is out there. And I bet all of you do that occasionally as well. On the recruiter side, it doesn't mean that they're actively calling a recruiter and saying, find me a job. But you know what? If a recruiter is contacting them, they will likely engage. They want to know, hey, if this is a similar role, and I seem to fit that role, what are you paying for that? They want to know if they're being paid fairly, and rightfully so. As well, they may even entertain an interview. What are the employee benefits? What are the perks of working here? They will have those discussions. In our consulting world, we hear a lot of that. Through our clients, through our employee discussions, they want to know, am I being paid fairly? And what kind of employee benefits are out there? So again, they're not going to necessarily jump ship. Right now we're in a pretty tight, stable economy, but they're going to entertain the thought of that. So that's why we're here today, is to discuss the strategic total compensation portion of your organization's overall benefits. So we're going to take a little bit of time to walk through the slides, and we're also going to do a case study, and we're going to have some fun group discussion throughout. So please ensure that you have fun, relax, and enjoy the presentation. So we do have 3 overarching objectives today that really will help you attract, retain, and hopefully engage your employees in your workforce. So the first one we're going to talk about is determining if you guys pay competitively in the external marketplace. We'll also share some best practices around that. Number 2, we also want to determine, are you paying your employees competitively internally? So we're going to have a look at your internal systems, your internal structures, and make sure you're kind of following best practices as well. And then number 3, we're going to talk about those benefits. Because remember, 85% are either actively looking or open to talking based on these 3 things. So we're going to close on those employee benefits and what will attract, retain, and again, engage your staff in your organizations. So we are going to start with the first thing is that external equity. Who here kind of has a good idea of what that external equity means? Okay, a couple of you, great. So really when we define external equity, what we're wanting to do is kind of look at our total remuneration package. So that's your salary, whether you pay wages, hourly, etc. It's also your perks that you offer, as well as any type of group benefits you have. So it's your total package. So that could include your vacation, maybe you pay overtime at a ratio of 2. Again, what is that total package? So again, I know we didn't move tables and you're familiar with the partners in your group. So please, in your group settings, your table groups, just take a minute to discuss how you know if you're paying your employees competitive from an external perspective. So we'll take 1 minute starting now in your table groups. How do you know from an external perspective? Okay, team, so before we dive in any further, I apologize. You do have the PowerPoint presentation at your tables. Oh, you don't have any? Okay, sorry, I'll bring them right over. So when we do think overall about external equity, thank you everyone for discussing. So when we think about external equity, we do have some general common best practices that we do like to promote within our organizations. So the first one in our best practices is to kind of talk about fair pay. And what does that mean? So really we want to take that issue of money off the table. Because again, our focus is in order to attract, retain, and engage, we want to make sure that we take that issue of money off the table. And we want to make sure we're paying people fairly for the jobs they're doing. And to do that, we kind of tied into a compensation philosophy. So these three are kind of like a domino effect. How many of you have a compensation philosophy in your organization today? By a show of hands. A few. Okay, wonderful. So that compensation philosophy becomes important because really at the end of the day, employees do want to be communicated to and with. So what does that mean? And we can look at the three parameters. We can look and see, are we actually leading the market in an external context? And that means we're generally going to pay above the average compensation in a given marketplace. As well, Juliana talked before about lagging in the market a bit. Again, do you want to pay less than the average market rate? We don't see that very often, and if we do, we provide some recommendations to move at least to that median line. So that median line is often called the middle or the average. Some people also refer to it as the average. And that's generally a safe zone. It's kind of where you want to be in order to actually start to attract those people to your organization. Now, retaining them ties into obviously performance management and goal setting, but when you have that compensation philosophy in place, you really do let your employees know what you're representing in your organization. So it's a policy as well, but it's built along your values and what you're truly wanting to represent to the employees in terms of your compensation structure. The third thing is market scan. Have you guys participated in salary surveys or market surveys before? How many by? Oh, that's great. So generally, again, these aren't right or wrong, they're general best practices. We see market scans done every 2 to 3 years. How often do you guys participate or do them? Every year. Okay, anybody else every year? Beautiful. How about every 2? 3? And how about more than 3? Anybody more than 3? Okay, so fabulous. We have kind of those years 1, 2, and 3. So those market scans become very important as our market starts to change, our positions change, we have to adjust. So we actually have a client, oh gosh, it's probably going back to a year ago. And I'll use them as an example because they kind of tie all these three in. They contacted us because they wanted to do a salary survey. Now again, you can do just simply a salary survey, or you can tie benefits in with it as well. But we always say be careful on the benefits side because there's a lot of information. So things that you're thinking about changing or maybe wanting to navigate to, include that. But don't include everything because remember the time commitment for your participants to complete that sometimes can be quite erroneous. So always be cautious of what is your intent of the survey. Anyways, we had this wonderful client. So they came to us and said, we need a new consultant to put together this market salary survey. Yeah, that's what I do. I love process and policy and numbers. So perfect opportunity. So what we ended up doing, it was 31 positions, and it was in kind of a healthcare setting. And again, number of participants, we ended up having 13, but we did the legwork on it. They wanted benefits included because they were thinking about changing their vacation and they were thinking about changing some of their overtime. So we were able to collect data on that. But I'm going to go back to fair pay. They really wanted to pay their people what they're worth. They didn't want them kind of putting that one foot out the door because of money. So that was one of their goals. Their second goals was their philosophy. They had one. It was strong. Can anybody guess how high it was? So we're talking percentiles. Most people are like a 50th percentile, 60th percentile in paying. Guess what they were at? Anybody want to venture a guess? In healthcare? 75. So they were wanting to pay 75th percentile, which means only a quarter of the employers would pay more than them. And it's a smaller market. They published that. They communicated that to their staff, that this is what they were willing to do as part of their compensation structure. They also had a step system and a very structured step system. It was really cool because after that salary survey, which they do roughly every 3 years, we had very little recommendations for them. I think we were able to focus on 2 positions that had changed, but other than that, they can actually take that to their employees and show them, hey, for your position, similar, and we were able to quantify, is it meets the position summary, is it bigger or less than? And they have that data to give to the employee. What does that do? It retains them. They already know they're being paid pretty fairly in that external marketplace. And again, if you have a large number of participants, you're almost getting the participants that they may jump ship to. So again, you're able to kind of solidify who participated and collecting that data. So again, all 3 of those they had in their organization. So again, those are some best practices you guys can use to take back to your organization. So now that we have looked inside or outside your organization, let's take a look inside your organization, because this is often the area where most people forget about, is kind of what are we doing internally. We're so worried about jumping on salarysurvey.com and pay scale that we forget to look inside our organization. So again, we're going to talk about some best practices, but at your table teams, think about the positions you have internally. So do you have people in similar positions being paid fairly? Do you have people in your organizations that are being paid relatively fair for the positions they hold? So for example, is a supervisor being paid more than their support staff? In some cases, we see the reverse. So I'm working with a client now where the supervisor, she leads a paralegal team. She actually makes the same as her subordinates. So that often happens when our structures become out of date and stale. So again, we're going to take a couple minutes at your table teams to discuss if you guys have internal pay equity issues. So 3, 2, 1, go. Have a discussion at your table team. 2 minutes. Okay, team, I'm going to just give you a call back. Finish up your discussion, and we'll talk about some of those best practices. Thank you very much. If I can have everyone's attention, that would be great. Thank you. And remember, team, we do have that Q&A at the end. So if there are opportunities where you have some best practices to share, please share them with us at the end as well through the Q&A, and we'll answer any questions you do have. But likely we'll touch on some of your comments at the table. So when we talk about that internal equity, again, we're speaking about best practices in your organization. So the first one is job analysis. So how many of you have done the wonderful process of job analysis in your organizations? Oh, a few of you. Beautiful. So this can be done for a wide variety of different things, but in compensation, how do we know what to pay if we don't know what you do? So in HR, and those of you who do HR off the side of your desk, we always say job descriptions are kind of that essential tool for everything we do in HR. And I know it seems time-consuming to actually have to create it and add in all these sections and keep it accurate, but I tell you what, it's going to be your major tool, and especially in compensation. This way I know what you do, and then I can kind of grade you fairly in the external and internal marketplace. So again, when we talk about job analysis, that's actually figuring out what people do. Sometimes it does include questionnaires, job shadowing, just interviews, and again, figuring out what they do. In that same client I was talking about earlier in the law firm, I went through this with their entire accounting department because we found there was a whole bunch of overlap and then silos. Like, I just do AP, but I can't do anything else. So we're like, well, what do you do then? What other than AP takes up 40-hour work week? So we did go through that exercise and figured it out. As a result, we restructured their accounting department. So sometimes it does lead to end results, but overall that creates the greatest efficiency. Ties into compensation again. If you just have an AP clerk, we know what we're going to look for externally. If you have an APAR clerk, you can also look internally. Do you have those same positions in your organization? And are they being paid relatively the same for similar work? And that's what we discuss when we talk about internal equity. Number 2, job evaluation. Now this is really determining the worth of a role in your organization. A lot of you may not use like a classification or evaluation system. How many do? Okay, so a few of you, what system do you guys use? Is it the Hay group? So that's one of the most popular methods. So the Hay group, or it can be simply, we've seen accountability matrices, we see it based on job, family, and again, it's determining the worth of your role in the organization compared to other roles in the organization. Number 3, compression. So that's again something you have to look at internally. So that's where you have to focus. Earlier I chatted about the supervisor and their direct report. Again, are they making the same? Are they making differences? And what is the difference between their salaries? If you have 2 EAs, for example, executive assistants, where are they at? We often see compression when we have current staff and we bring somebody in that's brand new and they either make more than your current employee in a similar position or they match. And I said this earlier, it ties into having an outdated compensation system. Again, we have a client where I'm not sure where their compensation came from. I think they just kind of picked things out of a hat. It wasn't based on anything. They were like numbers on an Excel spreadsheet. I'm like, okay, how do we do this? So for this specific position, we did look externally first when we were recruiting. So what is the market paying for this senior position? And we quantified that from 3 different sources. When we started hiring, obviously we validated that data. When we brought that person on, we had to obviously look internally because the role we were filling was very similar to a role we had existing. And the internal employee we had would have been making less. We can't do that. You know, people talk. They do. They talk about their salaries. We don't like them to. And they sign that confidentiality agreement, but let's face reality, they still talk. So what we did is we looked at that current employee and we actually gave her a salary increase. She had been there over 10 years and she was a senior in that company and had more experience than the person we were bringing on. So we did have to look at externally and then looked at our internal factors as well. So she was really happy. She got a salary increase. We brought the new employee in slightly below, and I like to see a compression rate. Again, it varies, but in this organization, seeing as how we're kind of looking at the whole big picture, 5 to 7% is what I was looking at for a compression between those 2 positions. Okay. So those are 3 best practices to look at kind of the internal equity. So now that we've discussed external, we've talked about internal a bit. Now we're going to go on to employee benefits. So again, this becomes pretty important to people. And in today's world, again, we're looking at different kind of perks. We all have heard about the traditional group benefits plan, you know, your life, your etc. But again, in today's world, that is almost like an entitlement or an expectation going into an organization. If people don't have a standard group benefits plan, it's like, what? That's so uncommon. But really, it's a privilege for our employers to offer those to people. And we have to ensure we do stress that, hey, this is a part of our offering. However, we also need to look outside that traditional scope and see what else you guys are offering. So we're going to take 1 minute quickly to discuss at your table teams again. What do you guys offer that's super cool as a part of your employee benefits package? So 1 minute, quick discussion, go. Okay, group, I had a super cool idea over here. I just kind of was eavesdropping, so I'm going to draw your attention over here because I thought, which one organization offers it? Okay, I just have to get you to say that. So if you would please make sure our mic is working, this lady here.
Sorry, what was it
that you offered your super cool employee benefit?
Oh, I work for the Edmonton Eskimos, so we offer our full-time staff season seats. So.
Right? Isn't that nice?
Pretty good perk.
Right? And not many organizations can do that, so that's actually unique, and I think that's a great benefit. So that does aid in...
I own my own company, and I have Eskimo seasons tickets, so in theory, do I not also provide Eskimo season tickets to my staff?
And that is true.
I can't do it for $30,000.
Right. And we used to do that too. And before I joined Juna, 5 years ago, I worked in a multifamily construction company, and we used to do the same thing. We had Edmonton Oilers season tickets, and then alongside, back then, you used to be able to get like first pick for concert tickets. I don't know if they still do that. Okay, so not as much as back then, but I think that's a really cool thing, and we used to actually offer that to staff. And they used to do like draws for that, so that was pretty neat. So some of the best practices around those employee benefits, I find number one, give them the information they need, because far too often we do not communicate our benefit value to our employees. So we're often missing the mark on what we do, the resources they have to obtain it, and why we're doing it for our organization. So again, lunch and learns are great. And how I've done those in the past is set one up, and then I send a survey around at the end, like what are the top 2 things, or you can have a checklist of what most interests you for your next lunch and learn. So you could do those on a quarterly basis or twice a year. Depends on what you want to portray in your organization. But I think those lunch and learns allow a great opportunity to connect with your staff and for them to see the value in your benefits. Number 2, orientation and training. I just did a session at AWE last week on the same topic around best practices. Again, when employees come in, you've already sold them, you've attracted them, now you got to work on that retention and engagement. So your onboarding and orientation program becomes critical in that first day, first week, and first month. So again, you're walking them through the benefits, why this is a great place to work. Some of those things that you may offer as an additional perk that others may not. And know that. Know your competitive advantage out there. And again, scan that external market, see what they're offering, and make sure that you're at least being competitive, if not offering a few extra things to them. Number 3, your culture. Of course. I'm a registered professional recruiter. I recruited for over a decade. And I tell you what, whatever position I'm looking for, they always ask, what is your culture? Well, what does that mean to you? Right? You've got to have a pretty unique answer to defining your culture and what that team looks like. And that is a benefit, because that's what people are looking for nowadays. Even though they jump ship a little bit more often than they're used to, your culture is award-winning. It's what defines you. It ties into your mission, your vision, your values. It will tie into your comp, your performance management system. It becomes a real beautiful package once you integrate it all together. And if you can actually offer that, you will attract the people. You'll have them knocking at your door. Plus, as well, you will retain them and engage them. So very important step there. So just a statistic to help you. So average organizations, they're usually about 14 to 15% of the employees' gross salaries, what they're offering in terms of benefits. We have seen some go up to 30. And those are more best in class. But again, you have to look at your budget. So 14, 15 is average, up to 30%. And remember, I know it takes time and effort to put together this group benefits plan and the perks, but it really does pay off. So I'm going to run you through some ideas that we've come across through just, client relationships and discussions. And some of these you may already know about. So I'll never forget, I went to a session with ATV, their Chief People Officer, and they have like TVs in their workspaces. I don't know if they're mounted around or how exactly they do that, but they believe that if the soccer game's on or a hockey game or an Eskimo game is on, that they'll actually allow the employees to watch the game because they believe it increases their productivity. And why? Well, then you don't have employees kind of alt-tab and streamlining the game, right? You actually have engaged people because they can actually participate in other activities as they're working. It's not all the time, but once in a while. And of course, like physical health, you may do running rooms. You may have yoga. Any type of stress relief or mental health in the workplace. Maybe there's dancing lessons, singing lessons being offered, whatever you can do to stimulate those employees and to give them a break away from the day-to-day routine of work. Time off is becoming more and more important. So my husband works for an organization, and they have a great benefits plan. So every year we get to renew. They give us this beautiful, large printout. So they think about the strategy. They're tying it into their mission. But overall, it communicates their offerings for the year. It doesn't change drastically, but they give a highlight. Here's what's changed. Maybe your LTDs increased by 5 or this decreased by 5, whichever. But they also tier it. They tier it. So depending on if you're single or family, it's more of a cafeteria style. You get so many dollars. And now you get to pick which tier you want, for example, under the health portion. You can pick a value plan or you can go up from there. And then at the end of the day, if you still have dollars left over, you can actually purchase days off. Or you can put it into your RSP account. You can do so many different things. And we're pretty good friends with a number of benefits people, and they can generally put those kind of packages together for over 100, and which is more of a cafeteria style. So just some pretty neat ideas. Also, telecommuting's become pretty big, but you gotta have the policies in place to support that. People working from home, we're starting to see the large offices start to decrease, shared workspaces or cubicles, and people working from home or other remote locations. So that's starting to take shift a little bit now too. Health spending account, lifestyle spending accounts are becoming quite popular based on what we want as employees. So we can actually select what's important to us or use those dollars for different things in our lives. Okay. So we're going to walk you through a case study. So on your table, you should all have case study Joan in red. I'm going to read this to you, similar as to what Juliana did, and then you're going to work in table groups for 15 minutes, and then we'll do a debrief. So that same spokesperson, feel free to switch her up or him up, but we will have a spokesperson in each table. So you are an office manager. You work in a small not-for-profit organization, 20 full-time, 5 part-time staff, as well as contractors on an ad hoc basis. Your job as the office manager is to oversee Edmonton, including the finance and admin team. You have 3 employees. Rachel, she's your receptionist. She works full-time, so she's a 1 FTE. Amanda, your administration coordinator. She works a 0.8. She handles operations and program support. Number 3 would be Joan, your accounting coordinator. 1 FTE. She does AR, AP, and payroll, etc. Joan is who we're focusing on. She's worked for the past 3 years in finance and administration. She started out in accounting as a permanent full-time clerk, making $42,000 a year. She soon took on payroll responsibilities, and after 6 months, the payroll clerk retired. We promoted her to accounting coordinator, and we increased her from $42,000 to $48,000 to acknowledge her workload, but her job description was never updated. Ahaha. Joan is a keen learner, likes to take on more responsibilities. Hard worker, she produces high quality work. She doesn't miss deadlines, almost no errors, and she has built really good relationships with your staff. So she is a keeper. We would kind of consider her a top performer. This year, a major grant was not going to be renewed, so unfortunately your revenues are decreasing. You had to make some tough decisions and lay a few people off. So in your area, you chose to package out your Amanda, your administration coordinator. You made the decision because some of the admin support required will decrease because some of those programs are being cut, about 60%. Because of that, we're going to ask Joan to absorb the extra responsibilities. Joan loves learning, and as you know, she has strong skills. You asked her if she'd be willing to take on the scope of work. She agreed, but only if she could get a pay raise. She has not had an increase in 2.5 years, except for the COLA, cost of living. She has also asked if she can get a vehicle allowance, as she lives 45 minutes outside of Edmonton, and she is aware a couple of the program managers get paid for mileage. People talk. Amanda has worked for just under 2 years, so she was the coordinator relaying off. She was making $55. Rachel, who's our receptionist, has been with us for a year, making $35, and she's also asked you for a raise at the annual performance review. We are making $65,000 in our office manager role. You may need to add duties to both the plates depending on what Joan can take on. You're not sure how that will change your other team's responsibilities. You know you probably can't pay Joan for what she's worth. Remember, we're not for profit, and our compensation philosophy is to lag a bit. So we're looking at about the 40th percentile. But you may be able to look at additional benefits because your benefits broker is working to find us some cost savings. So page 2 is the discussion questions. So there's 5 there. Should you give her a pay increase? What factors should you think about? And remember, we talked about the internal and external best practices. What processes would help validate your decision? What type of benefits could we look at? And then any other considerations at the end of the day. So you'll have about 15 minutes, and again, working your table groups, go through the scenario, answer the questions, and your spokesperson will debrief with the larger group. So 3, 2, 1, go. Have fun. So let's start with number 1. This half of the room, whoever the spokespeople are, should we give Joan a pay increase? And if so, how much is your recommendations? Who wants to answer? With the data provided.
So we're saying yes, but we hadn't determined the amount yet because we were still looking at, you know, her benefits options like learning, working from home, flexible hours, all those kinds of things.
Okay, so it's yes. Okay, who else? Who else thought yes and who has an amount? Thank you.
We
Jan.
are a yes, but we couldn't come up with a pay increase because you have to look at what responsibilities she is going to take on. We have to reevaluate her old position because her job description was never updated.
Yeah.
So how much of the operations program support, what things are you going to give to Rachel? Because obviously Rachel is a portion of this.
Yes.
And she's going to need an increase as well based on increased responsibilities. So it's a yes, but we don't have
Okay.
a number.
Who has a number? Anybody decide a number? Aha, please.
Arbitrary, but we just said it cannot be a token amount. Her last increase was what, 6,000? So we said, okay, 3,000 to 3,500, and maybe put it in a probationary period to see if that job actually fits both ways. Because once you stick her there, it could be the wrong fit, and then what do you do? So it has to feel like it's, and we also added because it benefits either more vacation, time off, work at home situation. If she's 45 minutes, maybe it's a company car that could be less cash oriented for the company. So
Let's talk about that. So a couple things. Probationary period when she's already employed. What would that look like for her? So again, as a management team or as the office manager, you would have to determine, can we legally do that? And yeah, you can. But again, what does that look like? And if it doesn't work, are we going to return her to her old job, or what's there for her if it doesn't work out? And as most of you probably know with the Bill 17 legislation, I'll just kind of dive that in a little bit. It's no longer, 3 months, it's 90 days. So I just thought I'd add that tidbit. So perfect, thank you. So number 2, and we kind of got into this discussion area as well, but what factors did you guys come up with that you need to think about when you're assessing this? So from this side of the room, okay, please. We'll wait for them, Meg.
So we were looking at, well, we were looking at internal, not so much external. And we were looking at changes in jobs. But we were also thinking that one of the factors that we really needed to think about was what's important to the employee. So she's asking for a benefit. So, you know, is it the benefit that's really important, or so what are the important things?
So what's important to her? And again, through performance, through compensation, all areas of HR, that communication does become quite key. I just recruited for a COO at a not-for-profit organization, and again, if you remember that 30% are looking at compensation and benefits, that was his driver to get in. He wanted the top of the pay band. I get it. But again, when they're internal, what are they really looking for? They know the job, they know the culture, but what is important to them? And obviously for her it was looking at a pay increase, but maybe that telecommuting and trumps it. So again, that's perfect. Have a conversation around that. What else did you guys come up with for number 2? Please. Thank you.
So we discussed that you need to look at the financial needs of the organization. So by taking Amanda's salary out of the equation, there's probably a certain amount of that needs to go back into the agency. So what's left over for reallocation after her payout and after what we need to take out of it, that can be put towards new salaries for the 2 employees that we would like to give an increase to. And then we talked about considering for Joan, also maybe benefits with extra PD opportunities or training because she likes to learn. So that might be something that could make
So
her
again,
wanna stay.
communicating the value and expectations and her wants. Thank you. I love the critical thinkers in the room. Who else? Number 2, what other factors did you have in there to consider? Anybody else want to take a quick stab at it? Okay. Oh, yes. Have another one. Thank you. Of course. And we learn from each other, so this is a great discussion. Thank you.
So one of the considerations that we were thinking about too is that depending on the distribution of the work, that there may be things that could be contracted out, like the IT support, or with only 20 employees, that maybe a payroll service was something that would facilitate more time to be involved in the other things.
Perfect. And that's exactly kind of our segue into kind of looking at that job analysis portion. So, and again, in order to consider what a position is worth, like Jan said earlier, you have to really know what that position is going to be doing. So maybe there is a nice balance to saying, well, let's give you a small salary increase because we know you're going to take on more. And then let's work on developing your role and your responsibilities and defining that, and then doing another assessment within a certain given amount of time. Yes? Oh, one more.
Another thing that I consider is that she has payroll.
Mm-hmm.
She knows what everybody's making. And her current title. I would just consider the fact that because she does payroll, she already knows exactly what everybody's making. She knows what Amanda made, and they're both holding coordinator titles, so the fact that they're not being paid equally is obvious to her.
Perfect. So again, that internal equity between similar positions, and again, the compression. Do we have a compression issue? And especially she has all the data. She is going to be looking at those numbers. So assessing the compression, and again, that internal equity. One other thing we have to do is the external market scan. Now again, I had a great comment from you as well earlier, and I encourage people to do this, is if you think that you're worth X amount of dollars in the external market, and again, I'm not pushing them out the door, but tell me why. And again, it comes to communication. So I've had people come to me and say, you know what, I can make $60,000 at this job. Well, share that with me. Tell me why. And especially as we're going through salary reviews or compensation reviews, I ask employees to bring that data to me. Because like we said at the start, people are looking. not necessarily actively looking, but they're aware of what's out there. So have them bring that data to you. It's communication, it's transparency, and you're working with them. Right here.
The other thing you have to watch with your communication, your pay equity, both internal and external, is making sure that your people are aware of your philosophy. Because you've stated right in the case that you're paying in the 40th percentile. Do your people really understand what that means in terms of budgets, in terms of salary, in terms of this type of stuff? So
That's right.
when they're coming back to you saying, I can get this much in the market, do they really understand where we are placing ourselves within that market?
Yeah.
And do they accept it?
How many of you are not-for-profits? Okay, so the large majority, and we see this as well. We are not-for-profit is some of our industry target markets, and we see this, that we can't afford to pay a COO, $150,000. Okay, well, what can we offer? What's going to attract the candidates? And really, it's a focus and a passion on what the organization represents, the cultural fit, and those services you're providing. So again, if people are passionate about that, they'll come for money is important, but again, communicate with the employees their needs and their wants. Thank you. That was great. Number 3, process people in the room. What processes are you going to use to validate these decisions? Any takers? Specific processes. We've talked largely about most of them.
Looking at the whole budget, if you want to track people, if they have no budget to work with, then you're frustrating everyone. Yeah. So I think that overarching, that's the big question here. You're going to lose some employees, you're going to save some money in salaries, but if you can't increase your budget, you have nothing to spend for operations, you're hooped anyway.
So would you communicate that to employees kind of at the onset? Here's where we're at, here's what we're looking at in terms of budget, or how would you approach that?
Well, I think you can do it in general terms. I try to refrain from keeping those high-level budget things from everyone. It's just usually senior management. So, but they are aware whether it's tight or not, So.
Would you communicate that you're losing some of that funding? Yeah, so would I.
It's common knowledge. We're not for profit. There's very little secrets involved.
Yeah. And again, comes down to that transparency and letting people know who, what, where, when, and why things are happening. Number 3, just to finish that off, I just had 2 key things which we've talked about, a bit about that job analysis. You might have to kind of dig a little bit deeper and figure out who's going to do what. And again, I've even taken job analysis a bit further and assigned percentages. Because if I don't quite understand that position, where are you spending the bulk of your time? And I like to kind of factor in the most important down to least important. That way when you are doing the job analysis, you have a sense of where they're going to spend that time. And a market scan, of course, is an important process, and that's why we always say power in numbers, power in your network. So a large majority are not-for-profits. Build your network up. Call others. Hey, this is our situation at a high level, of course. What are you paying your office managers? And even in the private industry, I used to work at that multifamily builder. We had our own network of HR professionals, so I could easily call up, give or take 3 or 4, and say, hey, what are you paying for site supers? And actually that network turned into, we created a team and did a market survey of all the builders. So it creates beautiful things when you can build a network and rely on others to help you out. Number 4, what kind of benefits can you explore with Joan? We're kind of working on our benefits plan, looking at some cost savings, but she wants some telecommuting and maybe something to consider her drive. So we haven't heard from this table. Who's your spokesperson? Number 4, see? Please.
We talked about flexible work arrangements for her. So depending on like which functions of the job she needs to do at what time, then maybe she's able to work from home, so she doesn't have to drive 45 minutes into the city, different things like that. And then we talked about she's really into learning and all of that, so offering professional development opportunities for her as well.
Beautiful. And the reason I came to this table is because I heard a discussion about payroll and the confidentiality behind payroll and whether it should be done in the office or whether it can be done off-site. And we had a bit of a discussion where we're starting to see that trend where payroll actually can be done off-site as long as you have the security and the measures in place in order to do that. You've seen it, right? I've seen it. How many others have seen payroll done off-site? Right? So maybe that could be instituted for her. What else did you guys have for number 4? Anyone else want to share? No? Okay. So we did put work from home. Is telecommuting an option? And if it is, make sure you have a strong policy in order to support that. Some considerations are like even ergonomics, simple things that we may not think about. Ergonomics, insurance, WCB. What does that look like if we're setting people up from home? And the big thing is, of course, expectations. I have a lot of senior people say, I don't know if they're going to be productive at home. I don't want to recommend working from home because of this, but your job as a manager or a leader is to set those expectations and make it work for the employee. But again, that's a lack of training and potentially a performance management system. New title. Maybe we'll consider giving her a new title to justify a salary increase once we figured out what it is she's going to do and we have looked internally and externally in the marketplace. You guys brought up development dollars, which is fabulous. So consider that and really assess what she wants and needs. And maybe a percentage of the budget can be allocated to the employees through the new budget system. And finally, succession planning. We need somebody to take our job over as office manager eventually. So what does that look like for your team? So that'll be a future consideration, but something you should be aware of as we're starting to plan. That ties in, of course, to budgets, which we talked about, compensation levels, etc. Anything else that you guys want to share as a part of that case study? No? No last burning comments? Okay, thank you. Thank you for participating. So on your table, Juliana went around and handed this resource list out to you. So it's double-sided, but it basically gives you a good idea of some of the salary data tools that you guys can use, as well as some information on COLA, the cost of living adjustments. We have some tools at the end of page 1. And on the back, there's a couple interesting articles I threw in there. So the apprenticeship job creation tax credits in there. The minimum wage fact sheet, because as you know, we're going up to $15 next year, and that's kind of the last increment. And then I did put a HR Reporter article in there if you're wanting to kind of see overall where salary increases are going. So it's 2.4% in 2018 is kind of the anticipated focus. So again, we're not seeing 3, 4, 8, 10%. We have not for a long time. But this will give you a bit of an article on the Canada-wide. And finally, some articles on employee perks. So a little bit about Forbes, Business News, and another one on Forbes to end. They have some cool ideas in there if you're looking for something neat to tie into your business units. So again, thank you. It was a pleasure to have met you guys initially and to communicate and work with you, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation today. And we do have a Q&A following, so I'll let you take over. Thank you, everyone.